My name is Lydia Cross. I am 24 years old, and tonight I learned what real fear smells like. It smells like damp concrete stale air and something sweet that turns your stomach. I had just returned from Seattle after 2 endless weeks by my mother's hospital bed. The drive from the airport felt longer than the entire trip. All I could think about was my 5-year-old son Ethan, his tiny laugh, the way he clung to me before I left. My father had promised to take care of him while I was gone. "You focus on your mother," he'd said. "I'll handle everything here." But when I pulled into the driveway of our old Oregon house, the windows were dark. No porch light, no sound of the TV my dad always left on. I tried the front door. Locked. That was strange. He never locked it this early. The night was too quiet. Then I heard a faint, uneven thumping coming from somewhere inside the house. My pulse jumped. I pressed my ear against the wood. Thump. Pause. Thump. It wasn't mechanical. It was desperate. I called out, "Dad." No answer. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking from exhaustion and dread. When the door opened, the silence hit me harder than the cold air. No lights, no voices. Just that muffled thumping, now clearer, coming from below my feet. The basement. I dropped my suitcase, heart slamming, and ran to the kitchen. The basement door stood shut, secured with a heavy new padlock. I had never seen it before. My fingers trembled as I touched the cold metal. From the other side came a small, broken sound, a child's cry. "Mommy!" My lungs froze. I knew that voice. "Ethan," I whispered. I tore through the drawers, searching for anything hammer-knife screwdriver. I found a crowbar near the garage and swung at the lock. The first hit echoed like thunder through the empty house. The second made my arms ache. On the third, it snapped. The door creaked open. The smell hit me first. Urine, sweat, mildew, fear. I flicked the light switch, and what I saw made my knees buckle. Ethan sat curled in the corner, barefoot, shaking. His face was streaked with dirt, and tears, lips dry and cracked. His little hands clutched a blanket that looked damp and filthy. When he looked up, his eyes didn't recognize me at first. "Mommy!" His voice was so small it barely existed. I ran to him, gathering him into my arms. He weighed nothing. His skin burned with fever. "Who did this to you?" I whispered, but deep down I already knew. Behind me, the front door opened. Heavy boots crossed the floor above us, calm, deliberate. My father's voice floated down steady and cold. "You're home early, Lydia." My arms tightened around Ethan as footsteps began to descend the stairs. That was the moment I realized the basement wasn't just a place he'd locked my son. It was the place he'd built to control us both. My father's boots echoed on the stairs, slow and steady, like he had all the time in the world. I held Ethan tighter, his small body trembling against mine, and every step he took made my heart slam harder. When Richard Cross appeared in the yellow light of the basement, he didn't look shocked. He looked annoyed, like I had ruined his evening. "You're home early," he said, his tone flat, almost casual. His eyes flicked to Ethan in my arms, then back to me. "What are you doing down here?" My voice shook. "What am I doing? Dad, he's been locked down here. He's freezing. He hasn't eaten. He's enough," he snapped, raising a hand. "You left him alone for too long. He broke your mother's frame. He needed to learn a lesson." The words barely registered. My brain refused to translate them into sense. A lesson. "You locked him in the dark." He stepped closer, the smell of cigarettes and aftershave heavy around him. "You don't discipline Lydia. You coddle. That's why he's turning into a brat." I tried to stand, but he grabbed my arm so hard I could feel his nails dig through my sleeve. "You're overreacting," he hissed. "You always overreact." Ethan whimpered. I jerked free, clutching my son to my chest. "You hurt him," I said. "You could have killed him." "Don't be dramatic," he said with a cold smile. "You've always had that flair for hysteria, just like your mother." The mention of her hit like a slap. My mother, who used to hide bruises under long sleeves and makeup. My mother, who once whispered to me, "Don't ever make him angry, Lydia." I saw it now so clearly it made me sick. She hadn't been weak. She'd been surviving. Richard moved closer again, eyes narrowing. "Put him down," He needs to apologize for the picture. Apologize. My voice broke into a laugh that wasn't really a laugh. He's 5. He's old enough to learn obedience, he said. You think I enjoyed it? You forced me into this position. You left Lydia. You made me the bad guy. You locked a child in a basement, I said quietly. You are the bad guy. His hand shot out fast, and he snatched my phone from my pocket before I could react. He looked at the screen, saw the missed calls from me, the timestamp. Who have you been talking to? Give it back, I said, stepping forward. He threw it against the wall. The case shattered. No one will believe you, he said calmly. You've been under stress. Your mother's illness. The divorce. Maybe you're projecting things again. Projecting, I repeated, trembling. There are bruises on him. He shrugged. Kid's bruise. He probably fell. You'll sound crazy if you say otherwise. The way he said it, calm, confident, almost made me question my own reality for half a second. That was his gift. The gaslighting was precise, practiced. He'd been doing it for years. He turned toward the stairs. You're tired. Feed the boy, put him to bed, and don't start your drama. Tomorrow you'll feel silly about all this. His voice softened in that patronizing way that always made my stomach turn. You know I love you, right? Everything I do for you. He walked up the door, shutting behind him, the lock clicking again. I held Ethan close, my whole body shaking. In that silence, I realized what terrified me most wasn't his anger. It was his calm. Because calm meant he thought he still had control, and part of me feared he was right. I wasn't always afraid of my father. When my mother was still alive, he seemed stern but predictable rules, curfews, chores. But after she died, something in him calcified, turned mean. The house in Oregon became less of a home and more of a museum of his authority. When I was 19 and pregnant, my boyfriend left. I moved back home because I had nowhere else to go. I remember standing on the porch holding the positive test, crying. My father opened the door, looked at me and said, You'll stay here until you learn how to choose better men. It wasn't compassion. It was ownership disguised as rescue. When Ethan was born, he called him my boy and told me I'd never have to worry. I thought he meant he'd protect us. I didn't realize he meant he'd possess us. It started with small things, how he insisted I quit my night shifts so he could help with the baby, how he'd correct the way I held a bottle, the way I folded clothes. He'd sigh like a disappointed teacher and say, You're not ready to be a mother. You're lucky you have me. When Ethan was 2, I tried to move out. I'd saved a little from part-time nursing work, found a studio apartment 20 miles away. The night I told him, he smashed a glass against the sink, cutting his palm, blood running into the drain. You'd abandon your own father after everything I've done for you. I froze. He wrapped the bleeding hand in a towel, his voice calm again. You need structure, Lydia. You and that boy both. The next morning, he'd already canceled the lease using my information. He had my passwords, my mail, everything. That was the first time I realized I was trapped. The second time came months later when I found bruises on Ethan's arms shaped like fingertips. I confronted him. He said Ethan had thrown a tantrum. A little scare never hurt a boy, he'd said, sipping his coffee like he hadn't just admitted to laying hands on my child. I called a friend, begged for advice. She told me to document everything. The next day, my father took my phone, scrolled through my messages, and smiled without humor. You think you can get me arrested, he said. Sweetheart, this is my house. You live under my roof. You and your boy eat my food. You should be thanking me, not accusing me. That night, I heard him pacing outside my door, muttering about ungrateful women and fathers who sacrifice. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many people in this town had ever told him he was wrong. The answer came to me years later. None. People respected Richard Cross. He'd coached Little League, donated to the church, smiled at grocery clerks. When he looked at you, he made you feel seen. When he looked at me, he made me feel small. Even when I started to see through him, I still hoped he'd change. After my mother's stroke in Seattle, he insisted I go care for her. Don't worry about Ethan, he'd said. He'll be fine. He needs a man's discipline anyway. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe he was still capable of love. But as I sat in that hospital room holding my mother's frail hand, I remembered her whisper years ago when she thought I was asleep. Don't let him raise another child, Lydia. He ruins what he touches. I didn't understand then. I do now. She wasn't warning me about his temper. She was warning me about his control, about the way he turned care into punishment, love into a leash. And when I saw Ethan's bruises in that basement, every memory snapped together like broken bones setting wrong. I realized he hadn't changed. He'd just gotten better at hiding. After that night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house made me flinch: the creak of floorboards, the hum of the heater, the quiet thunder of my father's steps in the hallway. Ethan wouldn't leave my side. He followed me from room to room, eyes wide and frightened, clutching his small blanket like a shield. He refused to go near the basement door. When I asked softly what had happened, he whispered, "Grandpa said you left because I was bad. He said if I cried again, he'd make me stay longer." My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the mug I was holding. That's how gaslighting works. It doesn't just twist your mind, it infects the people you love. The next morning, my father acted like nothing had happened. He made pancakes humming an old country song. He even set a plate for Ethan as if he hadn't locked him in a dark room for 2 days. "Eat up, champ," he said cheerfully. Ethan stared at the food but didn't touch it. I watched him, bile rising in my throat. "He's scared of you," I said. My father gave me that thin smile that meant danger. "He'll get over it. Kids always forget." I almost laughed at the irony. Forgetting was his favorite weapon. Pretend it never happened, and eventually maybe even I'd start to doubt it. But not this time. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "He won't forget. Neither will I." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or realization that the leash was slipping. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low. "You don't talk to me like that in my house." I felt Ethan flinch beside me. I forced my voice steady. "Then maybe it's time we leave your house." For a moment, the mask cracked. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching near his temple. He stood slowly deliberate, the chair scraping across the tile. "Try it," he said. "Go ahead. But you won't get far. You've got no savings, no car that runs no one who'll believe a word you say." He wasn't wrong, he'd made sure of that. My paychecks went into the joint account he managed for convenience. My car registration was in his name. My ID was expired because he'd forgotten to renew it with me. Every exit, every option was one he'd quietly sealed off over the years. Still, I forced a smile. "We'll see." When he left for work that afternoon, I grabbed my old phone from a drawer upstairs, the one he thought I'd sold, and recorded the bruises on Ethan's arms, his trembling voice, the way he said Grandpa got mad. Then I placed my phone on the kitchen counter facing the door and left it recording. At dinner that night, I waited for him to snap. It didn't take long. Ethan spilled a bit of milk, and the tension in the room shifted. Richard slammed his hand on the table, the glass shattering. "Look what you made me do!" he roared. I didn't move. I just stared at him. "You made yourself do it," I said softly. For the first time, he hesitated. My calm disarmed him more than tears ever had. His face reddened. He raised his hand. "Don't you dare!" But before he could finish, I stood catching his wrist midair. The movement was instinct fueled by years of fear turned into something colder. His eyes widened, not from pain, but from the realization that I wasn't afraid anymore. "You won't touch us again," I said, and in that moment, I knew the rules had changed. The morning after the milk incident, the house was eerily calm. I woke up before sunrise, half expecting to find another lock on my door. But when I stepped into the kitchen, my father was there already brewing coffee, whistling as if the night before had never happened. That was his pattern violence followed by warmth. A cycle of punishment and forgiveness that left me doubting which version of him was real. He poured me a mug and smiled. "You were brave last night," he said softly. "Standing up like that. I'm proud you've got spirit. But don't turn it against me, Lydia. We're on the same team." His voice was almost kind, and that made it worse. "Team?" I asked. "You terrorized my son." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You really should see someone about this anger. You imagine the worst. Always have." I looked at him across the table, wondering how many times he'd practiced those lines. He was still holding all the cards, or thought he was. But I was done playing. I forced a nod. "You're right, Dad. I overreacted. I'm just tired." His eyes softened with satisfaction. That's my girl. You just need rest. I'll pick up some groceries later. Anything you need? No, I said. We're fine. When he left, I exhaled shakily. That fake surrender was necessary. I couldn't run yet. Not without proof, not without help. Upstairs, Ethan slept curled beside my pillow. I brushed his hair and whispered, "We're getting out, baby. I promise." In the living room, I opened the drawer under the TV and pulled out a tiny camera I'd ordered months ago but never used. I hid it inside the hollow base of a ceramic vase on the kitchen shelf angled toward the table. Then I found the old voice recorder from my nursing classes and slipped it into my apron pocket. The next few hours were an exercise in endurance. My father returned from town humming, carrying groceries. He was in a good mood, dangerous territory. "Made pancakes again," he said. "Ethan likes them." "Thank you," I said, keeping my tone neutral. He sat across from me and began talking about my mother, how she couldn't handle responsibility, how she made things up. Every sentence was a brick laid carefully to build his narrative. "You know," he said, slicing his pancake, "the neighbors still ask how she's doing. I tell them she's resting. No point making them worry." "Resting," I repeated. "She's in a care facility." He smirked. "They don't need the details." "Truth's a flexible thing, Lydia. Most people only need the version that makes sense." I smiled faintly. "Like you do." He didn't catch it, or maybe he did and didn't care. He leaned back. "When people ask about you, I tell them you're trying, that you're emotional since the divorce." They nod. They understand. No one wants to think badly of a family man taking care of his troubled daughter. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to scream. He wasn't just controlling me. He was rewriting reality. And everyone believed him. That afternoon, while he was outside fixing the fence, I checked the hidden camera. The footage captured everything: the patronizing tone, the smug expression, the line about truth being flexible. It was enough to start building a case, but I needed more. I called my only friend Nina, a police dispatcher I'd met during training. My voice shook. "Nina, I have recordings. He's been hurting Ethan." She exhaled sharply. "Lydia, listen to me. You have to be careful. If he suspects you're documenting this, it'll escalate. Send me everything but act normal." He checks my phone. "Then don't text. Leave a drive somewhere safe." "I'll get it." That night, I pretended to fall asleep early. I heard my father pacing in the hallway, then stopping by Ethan's room. My chest locked in terror, but he didn't open the door. He was testing boundaries again. I stared at the ceiling until I saw the first light of dawn and realized the truth. He wasn't just trying to control me anymore. He was studying me, like a hunter watching prey, waiting for the next move. What he didn't know was that I had already made it. The following night, I decided it was time. The camera footage and audio files were enough to prove a pattern, and Nina had already told me she'd forwarded them discreetly to a detective she trusted. "Just keep yourself and Ethan safe until we can move," she'd said. Safe. The word didn't exist in my father's house. I waited until after midnight, counting the rhythm of his snores through the thin wall. Ethan was asleep beside me, clutching his stuffed bear. I had already packed a backpack, some closed documents, Ethan's birth certificate, the hard drive with the recordings. I slipped on my coat, wrapped Ethan in a blanket, and crept toward the back door. The cold air cut through me as I turned the handle. It didn't move. The lock had been changed. Panic rushed through my veins. My father's voice came from behind me, calm and almost amused. "Going somewhere, sweetheart?" I froze. He was standing in the doorway, still in his robe, his face half in shadow. "Dad," I whispered, trying to stay steady. "Ethan's sick. I'm taking him to the clinic." He stepped closer, the smile never reaching his eyes. "At 1 a.m? Don't lie to me, Lydia. You're not good at it." He grabbed the backpack, ripped it open, and dumped everything onto the floor, clothes papers, the flash drive. When he saw the recordings, the mask dropped. "You've been spying on me." "Protecting myself," I said, clutching Ethan tighter. "Protecting him." "From what?" His voice rose, the false calm evaporating. "From the man who fed you when no one else would. From the father who cleaned up your messes." He slammed the table with his fist, making Ethan cry out. "You think you can make me the villain. You want to ruin this family because of your weakness. I stepped between him and my son. Family doesn't lock a child in a basement." The silence that followed was more terrifying than the shouting. His eyes turned cold and vacant like a stranger's. Then, without warning, he shoved me. My shoulder hit the wall, pain shooting down my arm. Ethan screamed, "Stop hurting Mommy!" My father's breathing grew heavy. "You see what you've done," he said. "You're poisoning him against me." He advanced again, grabbing my arm. "You're sick, Lydia. You need help. You need to let go," I said through clenched teeth. He didn't. The next moment blurred the struggle, the sound of something cracking, maybe the phone hitting the floor, maybe my heart breaking. I remember Ethan crying. I remember the flash of my father's rage and then silence. He stood over us panting. "If you ever try to leave again," he whispered, "I'll make sure they take Ethan away. No one will give custody to a crazy girl who accuses her own father." He turned and left, locking the door behind him. For a long time, I just lay there staring at the ceiling, the pain in my shoulder pulsing like a drumbeat. Then I remembered the voice recorder was still in my pocket. I fumbled for it, pressed stop, and prayed it had caught everything. The next morning when he went to work, I packed again slower this time. I didn't care if the lock was new. I smashed the glass of the side window, bundled Ethan through it, and drove away in my rusted car. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 20 miles out of town. My hands were still shaking when I called Nina from the payphone. "I have the proof," I said. "He attacked me last night." Her voice was firm. "Then don't go back. We'll handle the rest." I looked at Ethan sleeping in the passenger seat, his face pale, a bruise darkening along his arm. "We're not going back," I whispered, but even as I said it, I knew this wasn't over. Men like Richard Cross didn't give up control, they came to reclaim it. I spent the next 12 hours in the car, parked outside a diner off Highway 26. Ethan slept curled in the back seat under my coat, while I tried to keep my breathing even. When the sun came up, the parking lot started to fill, and the ordinary world looked absurdly peaceful. Trucks unloading people laughing over coffee, no one realizing a woman in a dented blue sedan was trying to build a case against her own father. Nina arrived just after 9. She was still in her police dispatcher uniform, her hair tied back, eyes scanning the lot before she slid into the passenger seat. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. I handed her the hard drive, the audio recorder, and my phone with the cracked screen. "He knows," I said. "He found the files. Then we move fast." She called Detective Coleman on speaker. His voice was low and steady. "Ms. Cross, I've reviewed the footage Nina sent last night. It's compelling, but to open a criminal case, we need corroboration. Medical reports, witness statements, and confirmation that the child's injuries match the timing." "You'll get them," I said. "I'm at a clinic today. Ethan needs an exam." Coleman's tone softened. "You're brave for coming forward, but you need to understand men like your father, they don't quit quietly. Keep your doors locked. Tell me if he contacts you. He won't find us." I wanted to believe that. But around noon, when I left the clinic with Ethan's arm in a sling and a doctor's note describing clear evidence of physical restraint and minor contusions, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The message read, "You can't hide forever, Lydia." I showed it to Nina and she called Coleman again. "He's escalating," she said. "We'll file for an emergency protective order today." By evening, we were sitting in the small office of a county prosecutor. I gave my statement, everything from the basement to the night of the attack. I didn't cry. My voice was steady, almost clinical, like reading someone else's chart. When the interview ended, Coleman leaned forward. "We'll send officers to pick him up within 48 hours. Until then, go somewhere safe." "Do you have family?" I laughed without humor. "Not anymore." "A shelter then," he said gently. "Just for a few days." But safety wasn't the same as silence. I wasn't going to disappear again. "Detective, I said if you arrest him, do it publicly. People need to see who he really is." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Understood." That night at the shelter, I watched Ethan sleep in a real bed for the first time in weeks. He kept murmuring in his dreams, reaching for me. I sat by the window staring at the streetlights and thinking about how small his world had become. My father had stolen his laughter, our peace, and my belief in family, but he hadn't taken my resolve. I opened my notebook and began writing everything down. Dates, words, every bruise, every lock, every threat. I was turning pain into evidence, fear into ammunition. Before I turned out the light, Nina texted arrest warrant signed. Tomorrow morning. For the first time in years, I slept without checking the door. When I woke at dawn, I felt a strange calm. Justice was coming. I didn't know yet that it would arrive louder and more public than I ever imagined. The morning Richard Cross was arrested, the air outside the diner smelled like rain and gasoline. I watched from Nina's car as Detective Coleman and two uniformed officers walked across the parking lot toward my father's silver pickup. He was standing by the coffee counter inside, laughing with the cashier like it was any other Tuesday. When the officers approached, his face hardened, but he didn't resist. He always believed he was too smart to lose control in public. Richard Cross Coleman said you're under arrest for domestic battery, unlawful confinement, and child endangerment. The entire diner went silent. My father's eyes flicked toward the window where he knew I was watching. He smiled, slow, deliberate, a promise of vengeance. As they cuffed him, he said to the officers, "My daughter's unstable. She's setting me up." The cashier's eyes widened. I looked down, holding Ethan's hand, whispering, "It's over, baby. He can't hurt us anymore." But I was wrong. He could still talk. Within hours, the local news ran the story, community volunteer accused of domestic assault, family dispute, turns ugly. The comments online were split between outrage and disbelief. Half the town still thought of him as the generous neighbor who fixed fences and donated to the church. The other half had seen the truth in the leaked footage Nina sent the prosecutor, the recordings of his voice, the slam of his fist on the table, Ethan's frightened cries. By evening, reporters camped outside the shelter shouting questions. "Lydia, do you feel safe? Did your father really lock your son in a basement? Was alcohol involved?" I refused to speak. The prosecutor told me silence was safer until trial, but silence felt like surrender. 2 days later, Richard posted bail. That night, my phone buzzed again, another unknown number. "You embarrassed me. You'll regret this." I drove straight to the police station. Coleman met me in the lobby. "We can't hold him until the hearing," he said. "But the order of protection is active. If he contacts you again, we'll file additional charges." I clenched my fists. "That's not enough." He studied me for a long moment. "What are you planning?" "Nothing illegal," I said, though even I wasn't sure. "Just the truth." The truth arrived faster than I expected. The following Sunday, my Aunt Linda, the sister who had always believed him, called. "Lydia," she whispered, "your father wants a family meeting. He says he wants to clear the air." "You mean he wants to perform?" I said. "He invited half the town, didn't he?" There was silence, then a soft, ashamed yes. "Then I'll be there." The meeting was held at Donovan's, the restaurant where he'd hosted charity dinners, the same place where he'd once made a toast about raising good daughters. I walked in with Nina at my side, a flash drive in her hand. The restaurant buzzed with small talk, clinking glasses, forced smiles. My father stood near the front, wearing a navy suit, every inch the respected citizen. Lydia, he greeted arms open like we were family again. "Glad you came. Let's show everyone the truth, shall we?" "Absolutely," I said, and nodded to Nina. She crossed to the projector and connected the drive. My father frowned. "What's that?" "The truth," I said. The lights dimmed. The first video played, his voice booming. "You think you can make me the villain?" Then Ethan's small cry. "Stop hurting, Mommy!" Gasps rippled through the room. Faces turned. Some people stepped back from him instinctively. He lunged toward the laptop, but Coleman, stationed near the exit, blocked him. "Sit down, Mr. Cross." My father's composure cracked. "She's manipulating you all," he shouted. "That's not what it looks like." The second clip rolled, the one from the basement door. His words echoed through the speakers. He needed to learn a lesson. Silence followed, thick and electric. Linda began to cry. "Richard, what did you do?" He looked around, realizing no one was on his side anymore. "You can't judge me for doing what every father should discipline order." Coleman stepped forward. "That's enough. Richard Cross, you're under arrest for violation of a protective order and witness intimidation." The room erupted as he was handcuffed again, shouting my name, his face red with rage. I didn't move. I just stood there holding Ethan's hand, watching him dragged out past the same people who once called him a hero. For the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt the silence of the room turning toward me. Pity, maybe respect, but mostly disbelief that monsters can look so ordinary. When the door shut behind him, Nina whispered, "You just turned the town into witnesses." I nodded. He always wanted an audience. Now he has one. The trial began 4 months later in the county courthouse, a building of pale stone and glass that looked too clean for what it was about to hold. The media called it the Cross family case. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras poised. I sat behind the prosecutor's table with Ethan's small toy truck in my hand, something to keep me steady. Across the aisle, my father looked composed, wearing a pressed gray suit and the same calm smile he'd worn at every family dinner. He nodded at me once like this was another debate he planned to win. The prosecution started with the recordings, his voice, my cries, the slam of the door, Ethan's sobs. The sound filled the courtroom like a ghost that wouldn't die. I couldn't look up, but I heard gasps ripple through the room. The defense objected, calling the evidence incomplete context. The judge overruled. Then came the medical testimony. The pediatrician explained Ethan's bruises consistent with restraint or grip force by an adult. My own x-rays showed a hairline fracture in my shoulder. The defense attorney tried to suggest I might have fallen in a domestic dispute gone both ways. My attorney, a woman named Melissa, rose calmly. "Did you fall down the stairs, Mrs. Cross?" "No," I said. "I was pushed." When I took the stand, my legs felt heavy as lead. The defense tried to paint me as unstable, emotional, volatile, overly sensitive due to family trauma. I looked straight at the jury. "Yes," I said, "I am emotional. My son was locked in a basement. My father told him his mother didn't love him. If that doesn't make you emotional, you're not human." The room went still. Even the judge's pen stopped moving. Then my father testified. He talked about how he'd sacrificed everything after my mother's death. He said he'd done his best, that I was lost, angry, and ungrateful. He looked directly at the jury when he said, "All I ever tried to do was teach my daughter responsibility." Melissa stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Cross," she began in the video, "where you say he needed to learn a lesson. What lesson were you teaching?" He hesitated. "Obedience." To a 5-year-old, he didn't answer. "And when you told your daughter no one would believe her, was that also part of your lesson?" He shifted in his seat. "She twists things. She always has." "Do you consider locking a child in a dark basement discipline or punishment structure?" he snapped. The word hung there like a blade. When the prosecution rested, the judge called a recess. Outside, the courthouse steps were crowded with reporters. I stayed inside, sitting in the hallway with Ethan coloring beside me. He looked up once and said, "Grandpa's mad." "He can't hurt us now," I told him. The verdict came 2 days later. The jury filed in, faces solemn. My stomach twisted until the foreman spoke guilty on all counts. I didn't breathe. The judge thanked the jury, then turned to my father. "Richard Cross, she said you are convicted of domestic assault, unlawful confinement, and child endangerment. You abused your authority as a parent and guardian. This court sentences you to 10 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release." My father stood, his mask cracking for the first time. "This isn't justice," he shouted. "This is betrayal." The bailiff took his arm. As they led him away, he turned to me. "You'll regret this." "Lydia," I met his eyes for the last time and said quietly, "No, Dad, I'll remember this." When the door closed behind him, I didn't cry. I didn't clap or cheer. I just exhaled for the first time in years. Outside the courthouse, the sky was gray but soft. Ethan held my hand, tugging gently. "Can we go home now?" he asked. "Yes," I said, looking up at the clouds. Home. But not that house. The cameras flashed as we stepped onto the courthouse steps, but I didn't hide my face. The whole town could see me now, and for once I didn't feel small. I felt free. The day after the verdict, our faces were everywhere. News sites, morning shows, radio segments. Local father sentenced for basement abuse. Daughter's evidence exposes years of control. They called me brave, the survivor nurse, the whistleblower. But those headlines didn't show the truth. They didn't show the silence that filled my apartment when Ethan was asleep, the way every creak still made me glance toward the door. justice had come, but peace hadn't caught up yet. The prosecutor called to tell me Richard had been transferred to a medium-security facility near Salem. He'll be under supervision. She said no parole for at least 8 years. I thanked her, but my voice sounded distant even to myself. That night, I watched the news replay the footage from the restaurant the moment his mask slipped the crowd gasping. I thought it would make me feel vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. People in town changed overnight. Neighbors who once avoided my eyes now dropped off casseroles and letters. "You did the right thing. We had no idea." Some of them meant it. Others just wanted to wash the guilt from their hands. Even Linda showed up trembling with an envelope of old family photos. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes wet. "I should have believed you when you said he wasn't right." I nodded but didn't hug her. Forgiveness wasn't something I could hand out like sympathy cards. The hardest part was watching Ethan adjust. He woke from nightmares calling out for me for light. He asked once if Grandpa could come visit. I said no, and he looked confused, like punishment still felt normal to him. I enrolled him in therapy, and slowly the bruises faded, not just the ones on his skin, but the ones left in the small spaces of his trust. A month later, I received a letter from the prison. The handwriting was unmistakable, neat, precise. I opened it, heart pounding. "Lydia," it began, "I forgive you. You're still my daughter, and one day you'll see that everything I did was for your own good." I tore the letter in half, then in half again, until the pieces fell like ash into the trash. Nina visited often. We sat on my small balcony drinking coffee while Ethan played inside. "You changed something," she said. "You made people here look twice at what they called discipline." I smiled faintly. "I didn't do it to change anyone. I just didn't want him to win." When fall came, I took Ethan to the coast. The ocean wind was cold, the air sharp and clean. We stood by the water and he ran toward the waves, laughing free for the first time in months. I watched him, tears stinging my eyes, realizing that survival wasn't a finish line, it was a process. Some nights I still wake up reaching for the light switch, half expecting to hear that lock click. But then I remember the door is gone, the basement empty, and the man who built it is behind bars. And for the first time, that silence feels safe. 6 months after the trial, I was asked to speak at a community awareness forum on domestic abuse. At first, I refused. I didn't want to stand under bright lights and recount every bruise, every scream, every night spent whispering promises into the dark. But then I thought about Ethan, about what silence had cost my mother, about how many people had called Richard a good man even while he destroyed us behind closed doors. So I agreed. The event was held in the same community center where he'd once hosted fundraisers for family values. The irony wasn't lost on me. I wore a simple navy dress, the kind my mother used to wear when she still smiled. When I walked onto the stage, the crowd went quiet. Flashbulbs popped. My hands trembled, but my voice didn't. "My name is Lydia Cross," I began. "For 24 years, I believed my father loved me. Maybe he did in the only way a man like him could, by controlling what he feared losing. But love that demands obedience isn't love. It's ownership." The room was still every breath heavy. When I found my son locked in that basement, I didn't just see a terrified child. I saw myself at 5, 10, 15 being told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. Gaslighting isn't just lying. It's theft. It steals your memory of what's real. I spoke for 15 minutes about patterns, about power, about the way abusers build cages out of guilt and tradition. When I finished, no one clapped at first. Then slowly the applause began. Some were crying. One woman stood up and said, "You just described my husband." Another whispered, "I wish I'd had your courage." Afterward, I stepped outside into the cool evening air. The sky was streaked with the last traces of pink. For the first time, I felt something close to peace. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of truth. Nina joined me leaning on the railing. "You realize you're going viral, right?" she said with a grin, holding up her phone. A local journalist had posted a clip of my speech. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times, tagged with phrases like #Justice for Lydia and #Never Too Old for Truth. That night, as I scrolled through the comments, I found one that made me stop. It was from a man named Daniel, a therapist from Portland who worked with survivors of family trauma. "You spoke with clarity and courage. If you ever need help turning your story into education, I'd be honored to collaborate. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a patient or a case file, I felt like a person with purpose. I started meeting with him weekly, helping develop workshops for young adults about gaslighting and generational control. Speaking out became my therapy. Each time I told the story, it hurt a little less. Each time I reclaimed a piece of the voice my father had tried to silence. One afternoon, Daniel asked me, "Do you ever think you'll forgive him?" I thought about that long and hard. "Forgiveness is for people who are sorry," I said. "He isn't." "But what about letting go?" I smiled faintly. "That's different. I already have." A week later, I received another letter from the prison, shorter this time, angrier. I didn't open it. I burned it in the sink and watched the paper curl into black curls of ash. Ethan ran in laughing, holding a drawing of us standing under a bright yellow sun. "That's our new house," he said proudly. I picked him up, breathing in the smell of crayons and freedom. "It's beautiful," I told him, and it was. Because the best revenge wasn't the prison sentence or the headlines, it was the life we were building now, one where the locks were gone and the laughter was real. A year later, the house that once belonged to Richard Cross stood empty, its windows bordered the yard, overgrown. The bank had seized it after unpaid taxes and legal fees piled up. Sometimes when I drove past on my way to work, I slowed down, not to mourn, but to remember. That house had been my cage. Now it was just a shell, rotting wood, peeling paint, and the faint echo of a man who believed control was love. I rolled down the window and whispered, "You don't own me anymore," before driving on. Life had rebuilt itself quietly. Ethan had grown taller, his laughter louder. He started kindergarten and came home with drawings of rockets, suns, and smiling stick figures labeled Mommy. He still asked questions, sometimes why Grandpa couldn't visit, why we moved, but each time I told him a little more truth. Some people forget how to love safely, I'd say. When they hurt others, instead of helping, they lose the right to be close. He accepted that. Children have a way of understanding pain better than adults do. They just don't complicate it with excuses. I had begun working full-time again at the community health clinic. Patients recognized me sometimes. "You're that girl from the news, right? The one who caught her father." I'd nod, but I always added, "I'm not the story. The lesson is." Because that was what this journey had become, a living reminder that silence protects abusers more than shame ever could. Daniel and I turned the workshops into a nonprofit called Second Light. We traveled to schools, hospitals, and small towns that still called abuse family business. I stood in front of crowds and said the words I once couldn't love without respect is just fear in disguise. People listened. They cried. They wrote letters. Some even left their own cages. And yet, justice wasn't perfect. My father's appeal was denied, but his name still came up online. Supporters claimed he'd been unfairly portrayed, that discipline had become a crime. I didn't respond. I'd learned that silence, when chosen, can be power, not submission. The truth didn't need defending anymore. It had already stood in court, played on screens, and been written into law records for everyone to see. One gray afternoon, about a year after his sentencing, I got a call from the prison. A social worker's voice said gently, "Ms. Cross, we are required to inform you your father suffered a heart attack this morning. He's stable for now, but we wanted you to know." I said nothing for a long time. The social worker asked, "Would you like to send a message or visit?" I thought about the man who'd once towered over me, who'd locked my son in a basement and called it love, who'd written letters trying to bend guilt into obedience, even from behind bars. Then I thought about the man he never managed to destroy, the version of me standing free, holding her child, building something honest from ruins. "No," I said quietly. "He knows everything he needs to know." After I hung up, I took Ethan to the park. The air was cool, the sky cracked open with spring light. He ran across the grass, chasing a kite that lifted higher and higher, his laughter trailing behind it. I sat on a bench feeling the warmth on my face and realized that peace didn't come like thunder. It arrived like sunlight through cracks, slow, steady, patient. That night, after I tucked Ethan into bed, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and began to write not the story of what he'd done, but what came after. About resilience, about mothers who fight back, about sons who learn that love doesn't have to hurt. I titled the first page, "Never Too Late to Stand Up." As I wrote the final line, something inside me settled. The pain had carved out space for purpose. I wasn't the frightened daughter anymore. I wasn't even the victim who exposed him. I was the woman who survived him and built something beautiful in the aftermath. When I finally turned off the light, the house was quiet, filled only with the gentle rhythm of Ethan's breathing from the next room. The same silence that once terrified me now felt like home. Because the true ending wasn't his punishment, it was our freedom. And freedom, I learned, is the most unrelenting form of revenge.